There are moments in history when no official announcement is needed. Sometimes, a single image tells a bigger story than thousands of carefully chosen words. On one unforgettable evening, photographers captured something almost no one expected to see. An elegant chair stood perfectly prepared inside a royal reception hall. Everything was ready. The guests had arrived. Senior officials were already taking their places. King Charles was there, but one chair remained empty. It wasn't just any chair. It was the Queen's. Within minutes, questions spread through royal circles. Why wasn't Queen Camilla sitting beside the king? Was she ill? Had plans changed? Or had something happened behind palace doors that the public wasn't supposed to know? That single empty chair quickly became the center of intense discussion, not because the palace explained it, but because it didn't. And whenever Buckingham Palace stays unusually quiet, speculation grows even louder. Over the following hours, reports and commentary began suggesting that an important internal decision had taken place before the reception. Some royal observers believed the discussion wasn't about today's duties. It was about tomorrow's monarchy, about what happens after King Charles' reign, about who will guide the crown into its next chapter. If those reports were accurate, then this wasn't simply another family disagreement. It was a debate over the future structure of the monarchy itself. At the center of that debate stood three people: Queen Camilla, King Charles, and Prince William. Each of them, according to the reports, believed they were protecting the institution. But they all had very different ideas about what protecting it actually meant. For Camilla, years of public service had become part of her life's work. For Charles, every decision involved balancing his responsibilities as both a husband and a monarch. For William, the focus appeared to be something else entirely: preparing the monarchy for the generation that comes after his father. And that's where this story becomes far more complicated than a simple palace disagreement. Because if one side was trying to preserve continuity, the other side may have been trying to create a clean new beginning. So what really happened inside those private palace meetings? Was this a carefully planned constitutional adjustment? Or did it become an emotional family conflict that no one expected to unfold so publicly? Today, we're going to separate the public reporting, the royal commentary, and the speculation surrounding this remarkable story. Because sometimes, the most important royal decisions aren't announced from a balcony. They're revealed through silence, an empty chair, and the questions nobody can ignore anymore. If the reports surrounding this story are accurate, then the real turning point didn't happen during the state reception. It happened days earlier, not in front of cameras, not before reporters, but inside one of the palace's private meeting rooms, where only a handful of senior figures were believed to be present. Nothing dramatic was announced. No voices were reportedly raised. Yet, according to the narrative described in the transcript, one discussion quietly changed the direction of everything that followed. At the center of that conversation was a surprisingly simple question: when one king's reign ends, what exactly should continue into the next? To many people, that might sound like a technical constitutional issue, but inside the monarchy, it can determine who keeps influence and who doesn't. According to the story presented in the transcript, Queen Camilla reportedly supported an idea that would help maintain stability during the transition from King Charles' reign to Prince William's future reign. Supporters could argue that experienced advisors and established charitable networks might make such a transition smoother. From that perspective, continuity wasn't about gaining more power. It was about avoiding confusion, but not everyone viewed it that way. The script portrays Prince William seeing the proposal through a completely different lens. Instead of continuity, he reportedly saw the possibility that informal influence could continue into his reign without his full approval. And for the future king, that raised an uncomfortable question. If a new monarch begins with decisions made by the previous royal household, is it truly a new reign? That question changed the tone of every discussion, because suddenly this wasn't only about paperwork. It became about principles, about where one reign ends and another officially begins. King Charles, according to the transcript, found himself standing directly between those two positions. On one side was the woman who had spent years supporting him during public duties and difficult moments. On the other was the son who would one day inherit the crown and carry responsibility for its future. Either choice risked disappointing someone he loved. Royal commentators have often noted that constitutional responsibilities and family relationships don't always move in the same direction. And this story captures exactly that tension. The transcript also suggests that trusted senior royals and advisors became increasingly involved as the discussion developed, making the issue feel less like a private disagreement and more like an institutional decision. By this stage, something else had quietly changed. Trust, every delayed response, every private meeting, every document waiting to be signed, started carrying more meaning than anyone intended. When communication disappears, people naturally begin filling the silence with assumptions. And inside a palace already surrounded by public attention, assumptions can spread faster than official statements. No one outside those rooms could hear every conversation. But if the transcript's account reflects how events were perceived inside the palace, then the relationship between Camilla, Charles, and William had already entered its most difficult chapter, long before that now famous empty chair appeared. And what happened next would turn an internal royal disagreement into a story the entire world would begin talking about. By the time the next round of private discussions reportedly took place, this was no longer just about procedures. It had become deeply personal. According to the account presented in the transcript, palace officials had reached a point where they believed a formal decision could no longer be delayed. If that decision was approved, Queen Camilla would continue serving beside King Charles during his reign. However, her influence would not automatically extend into the monarchy that followed. That distinction may sound small at first. In reality, it changes everything. Imagine spending years helping build an institution, only to discover that your role has a clearly defined ending, not because your title disappears, not because your marriage changes, but because the future has already been planned without you. According to the narrative in the transcript, this realization became the emotional center of the story. Reports described an atmosphere that felt unusually quiet, no dramatic confrontation, no public argument, just difficult conversations taking place behind closed doors. And sometimes, silence can carry far more weight than shouting ever could. One of the biggest questions surrounding this story wasn't whether the decision had been discussed. It was something far more emotional. Did King Charles know what was coming? If he did, why didn't he warn Camilla beforehand? That question transformed what could have remained a constitutional discussion into something much more personal. From Camilla's perspective, according to the transcript's narrative, the greatest disappointment wasn't necessarily the decision itself. It was the feeling that she had walked into one of the most important meetings of her royal life without knowing what awaited her. Supporters might argue that every major institution eventually has to define where one administration ends and another begins. Critics, however, could ask whether that process should have been handled with greater transparency and compassion. And that's exactly why public reaction became so divided. Some commentators viewed Prince William as protecting the long-term independence of his future reign. Others felt the process appeared unnecessarily painful for someone who had spent years carrying royal responsibilities. Meanwhile, King Charles appeared to be caught in an impossible position. As a husband, he wanted to support his wife. As king, he also had to think about the long-term stability of the crown. History has shown that monarchs often face moments where personal relationships collide with constitutional responsibility. Whether this particular account reflects every detail or not, the transcript presents that conflict as the heart of the entire story. Then came the moment that changed public perception. Instead of hearing about a decision through an official palace statement, people first noticed something much simpler. Queen Camilla was no longer where everyone expected her to be. Her absence immediately raised questions. Questions became headlines. Headlines became worldwide speculation, and before Buckingham Palace had the opportunity to fully explain anything, the story had already escaped beyond palace walls. What had started as an internal discussion was now becoming an international conversation, and the biggest chapter was still about to unfold. Until this point, everything had happened behind palace walls, private meetings, confidential discussions, carefully guarded documents. The public knew almost nothing. Then, in a matter of minutes, everything changed. Not because someone leaked a document, not because the palace issued a dramatic statement, but because one unexpected moment became impossible to ignore. According to the account presented in the transcript, Queen Camilla did not appear at an important royal reception after the internal discussions had taken place. That absence quickly became the focus of public attention. At first, people searched for ordinary explanations. Perhaps she wasn't feeling well, perhaps her schedule had changed, perhaps there had been a last-minute adjustment, but as the evening continued, those explanations became harder to believe. Royal correspondents noticed the unusual silence. Photographs circulated across newspapers and social media. Commentators began asking the same question: why would the Queen suddenly miss such an important royal event? Within hours, the conversation had moved far beyond palace insiders. Television panels, royal experts, and millions of viewers around the world began offering their own theories. Some believed the reported restructuring inside the monarchy had finally become public. Others argued that the situation was being exaggerated and that no one outside the palace actually knew the complete story. The truth was, the lack of official information allowed speculation to grow even faster. And whenever information is limited, public imagination often fills the gaps. According to the transcript's narrative, King Charles now faced perhaps the most difficult moment of the entire crisis. He wasn't only managing constitutional questions anymore. He was also watching a private family disagreement become an international headline. Every decision now carried consequences. If the palace remained silent, people would assume the worst. If officials spoke too quickly, they risked making the situation even more controversial. Meanwhile, attention gradually shifted toward Prince William. Supporters described him as a future king trying to establish clear constitutional boundaries before beginning his own reign. Critics questioned whether those same objectives could have been achieved in a way that caused less public embarrassment. For William, according to the story, this had never been about personal victory. It was about ensuring that future generations, including Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, would inherit a monarchy defined by clear institutional rules rather than informal arrangements. Whether people agreed with that reasoning or not, it became one of the central debates surrounding the entire controversy. As headlines continued spreading around the world, another important reality became impossible to ignore. This was no longer simply a story about royal procedures. It had become a story about trust, about loyalty, about difficult choices made inside one of the world's most closely watched families. But just as public opinion seemed more divided than ever, something unexpected reportedly happened behind closed doors. Instead of continuing the conflict, a private conversation began to change its direction, and that meeting would determine whether this royal dispute ended in permanent division or an unexpected compromise. After days of growing speculation, one question still remained unanswered. Could this royal family move forward without creating an even deeper division? According to the account presented in the transcript, the answer didn't come through another public ceremony. It reportedly came through a private conversation, away from television cameras, away from palace advisors, away from the headlines. The discussion, as described in the transcript, focused less on who had won and more on how the monarchy could move forward without allowing the disagreement to become a permanent family wound. By this stage, everyone involved appeared to understand one important reality. The public had already formed opinions. Some sympathized with Queen Camilla. Others believed Prince William was simply preparing responsibly for the future. And many felt sorry for King Charles, who seemed caught between his role as a husband and his duty as the monarch. According to the narrative, Queen Camilla reportedly accepted that the future monarchy would have different boundaries from the present one. Rather than allowing the story to end as a public confrontation, she was described as supporting an arrangement that clearly separated her present responsibilities from any future authority after King Charles' reign. That decision changed the entire tone of the story. Instead of asking, "Who defeated whom?" people began asking a different question. Was this ultimately an act of compromise? Prince William, according to the transcript, also acknowledged that while constitutional planning was important, the way events unfolded had created unnecessary emotional pain. That distinction mattered, because protecting an institution and protecting relationships are not always the same thing. Sometimes both sides believe they're doing the right thing, yet both still leave the room feeling they have lost something valuable. King Charles reportedly remained at the center of that difficult reality. As a father, he understood why his son wanted clear boundaries. As a husband, he understood why Camilla felt deeply hurt. And perhaps that is what makes this story resonate with so many people, because behind the royal titles, behind the ceremonies, behind centuries of tradition, there are still human emotions, trust, disappointment, forgiveness, and the difficult process of rebuilding relationships after painful decisions. According to the transcript, the final arrangement allowed Queen Camilla to continue serving beside King Charles during his reign while making it clear that future constitutional responsibilities would belong to the next generation of the monarchy. Whether every reported detail unfolded exactly this way is something only those inside the palace could truly confirm, but one lesson stands out. History often remembers the public moments, the speeches, the ceremonies, the photographs, yet many of the decisions that shape institutions happen quietly behind closed doors long before the world notices. And perhaps that's why one empty chair captured so much attention, because it reminded people that sometimes the loudest message is the one that is never spoken. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most talked about royal stories, let us know your thoughts below. Do you believe this was simply constitutional planning? Or did the palace mishandle a deeply personal situation? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next royal update.